So this will be my first video tour of my garden at Calliope Corner in North Eugene, Oregon in quite some time. And this is more or less for my own documentation of how things have progressed since I started renovating the place about 2 years ago. I started doing intense work on the garden. The first thing I did was get rid of the lawn and replace it with bark mulch. And then I also expanded the limited perennial beds, which were planted already with mostly flowers, perennials that attract pollinators, but general pollinators, and moved them throughout the yard into the places that used to be lawn. And then I introduced a whole bunch of native plants as well, shrubs. There were almost no shrubs in the yard before, and other perennials that attract not only pollinators, a wide spectrum of native pollinators, unlike the general pollinator plants, which often attract honeybees, but also attract a host of other insects, including beetles, wasps, bees, moths, and butterflies, which help diversify the web of related interactions with native birds in the yard. I've also expanded the vegetables and fruits that I grow in the garden, which formerly were confined just to the raised beds in the backyard, and I now just plop potatoes and garlic and tomatoes in wherever I want in the yard. Just has to be enough sun there. So here goes the tour. So this is looking down Lake Drive out of my driveway. My whole yard is enclosed by gates and a tall fence. And here's a nice panorama of the yard. That's my neighbors to the west. And this is Calliope Corner. So here in the front, it's not my native garden. This is where I planted some pansies on both corners over here and over here, which still persist 2 years later. They reseed as well as survive the winter. But I'm not doing much over here. I planted this Daphne over here just 2 years ago, and it had a nice flush of bloom this spring. These rose campions are volunteers that I have kept there, and occasionally I will let one grow up. You see, they do reseed prolifically, but they're easy to keep under control. They're not super invasive. And then over here I have a fuchsia that is doing well. It's actually put up little sprouts well away from the crown, so I think it's going to be a little more successful this year in being more established. And I didn't dig up the tuberous begonias this past winter yet. There's 3 of them in here that have survived the winter, rather cold, wet winter, in fact, for Western Oregon. But they probably won't bloom until the very end of the summer, if at all. If you want them to bloom, you have to bring them in and force them earlier. Some of the native plants I've put on this west side, which only gets some hot afternoon sun, are a couple of coyote bush, baccharis, and a twin flower honeysuckle. And already in the yard was this beautiful Oregon manroot, or man in the ground, Mara oregona, one of only 2 members of the cucumber family native to Oregon. Several different pollinators like the flowers, and scrub jays really enjoy the seeds. So the southern part of the yard is a bit shady during much of the day because of this big row of western red cedars. This is one of the Camas lachlinii that I planted. I put 5. I put 5 potted tubers in the ground, and they've all but one of them have survived. And just this last year, for the first time, they have seedlings around. This one just has a very few seedlings that have sprouted because we had a nice wet December and early January, which I guess is the time that they probably germinate. And in the shadier part of the garden, I put in snowberry, a couple of Indian plums, native delphinium, trolifolium. I actually saw rufous hummingbird feeding from it a couple of days ago. Our native bleeding heart, and back here were some plants that were already here, non-native bleeding hearts, and a sword fern. And I'm not sure what kind of ornamental fern that is. I put in the Oregon grape. Unfortunately, of the 4 Indian plums that I planted around the yard, only one of them is a female. This one here, they are what's called dioecious, meaning male and female plants are separate. I've kept some yarrow in 3 little islands here, but they spread through runners and reseed rampantly, so it's been a lot of work just keeping them to their own little spots. I also wanted to mention the native columbine. There was one in the front yard when I moved in, and I saved seed and scattered it, but the yard is dominated by a purple-flowered non-native. And when I took some seeds and scattered it over here, I got some of the nice native Aquilegia formosa. But what I also got was apparently a hybrid between it and the dark purple ones. The dark purple ones seem to be ignored by hummingbirds, but I have seen Rufus and Anna's hummingbirds feed from these supposed hybrids. I will try to encourage just the natives from now on. This eastern third of the front yard is what I call the oak service bush prairie. We're not part of what used to be wet prairie, but because the soils do drain pretty well right here. Lots of river rock. We are also on the historic Willamette River floodplain here, so the soils are super rich and everything grows tall and lush. I have native Viola adunca. Pretty sure that's the species here. Another Oregon grape. This is Lupinus polyphyllus, the big-leafed, giant-leafed lupin. And I planted 2 of them. Actually, it was one that came in a pot and a little side shoot. It was this one here, and they have reseeded prolifically. It's not a super pretty plant, but it attracts bumblebees. Here's my Oregon white oak, which was a gift from the neighbors. One of the best plants you could possibly put in your yard to attract native insects and therefore birds. This is part of the garden where I have removed or divided a lot of perennials from the central perennial bed and put them over here, including coneflower, coreopsis, a cultivar of goldenrod and penstemon, and some asters. This native Romer's fescue. This is our native tough-leaf iris, which my friends Craig and Stephen gave me, and put it in last year. It got established, and this year it looks like it's been here forever. Here's the serviceberry, Amelanchier, and it bloomed beautifully this year. Will be a perfect small tree in this area. Let's see what else is here. This is, I think, a Stachys in the mint family, non-native, but it attracts lots of pollinators and goldfinches like the seeds. This is one of the native checker mallows that I bought, Sedalcia campestris, and I bought 2 of them to put in the yard, not knowing that there was already one, and you can maybe see it in the back there, right to the left of the bird feeder. Also, I planted a different species, also a native checker mallow. This is Sedalcia malviflora variety virgata, and the one over in the perennial bed in front of the house is blooming. This is pretty much the only shrub that was in the yard. This is Ceanothus thursiflorus, fabulous plant for a wide variety of pollinators, especially leptorine longhorn beetles. And here it's just starting to bloom. See, you got the active birds in the yard, house finches right now, lesser goldfinches, pine siskins. And this is another native I planted. This is Douglas's aster, or Symphyotrichum subspicatum. Evening grosbeaks flying over. Let's see, I have 5 Oregon grapes in the yard, and they're all very, very happy in this soil. Here is a non-native clematis that was already in the yard, and it's a very pretty purple flower. I think it's called Ramona, and I have no reason to leave it out, but it doesn't attract any native insects or birds as far as I can tell. In this shadiest corner of the house, of the yard, I have this native bleeding heart, Aquilegia formosa, and one of my prizes of the yard is stinging nettle, which one can grow as a culinary plant. They make really good addition to soups, but I brought it for the incredible number of arthropods that forage on it. There are aphids that feed on it. Several kinds of moth caterpillars feed on it. And just recently I watched a red admiral fly in and lay eggs on it. So there may be some red admiral caterpillars in here as well. Right now it's covered in aphids, and the aphids are being ranched by their ants. But birds also come in here and feed on the aphids. I've had a migrant Wilson's warbler come in here and feed on the aphids. Here's my Fuji apple tree, which this year will have very few apples. Didn't have very many flowers. Here's the main perennial bed over here, where I've now moved things out into the main part of the yard, and I also eliminated some things right here. There used to be a Russian sage, which was incredibly invasive. Was sending up shoots about 3 meters away from the main part of the plant. I also put some food in here. So this right here is black currant, and then over there on the back side I have red currant. And the 3 native shrubs I put in here is a super tall 9-bark, which is just starting to bloom. And I should be standing here watching to see what kinds of pollinators come into it. There's probably quite a few things. Everything's heading for the ceanothus, though, as it starts to warm up. It's been a very cool and wet spring so far. We've had over 3.5 inches of rain in May, and that was just the first 2 weeks, and that's more than we get for the total month normally. This native shrub is ocean spray, and this is a hybrid between 2 native species of Spirea, which was a gift from my friends Stephen and Craig in Portland as well. And this is where I had a whole bunch of herbs and peppers and other vegetables, and I put in some Walla Walla sweets, which I bought as an impulse at the grocery store, or at the garden store, because they looked like they were about to die, and I hadn't decided what to do with this spot. I think they'll be a nice summer snack. I also had put some 3 ground cherries in here, and these are seedlings that have volunteered from last year's crop of ground cherries. This is a volunteer of Viola adunca, and I have I've discovered maybe a dozen seedlings around the yard from just one that I planted. Let's see, over here there's a native red flowering currant, and I have 5 of them in the yard, various sizes. This is a phlox, which is semi-native, but doesn't really have much benefit to insects as far as I can tell. My neighbors gave me several native plants in pots, including this Oregon hazelnut or filbert. And here's one of these really tiny viola seedlings, and here's another down under here. I weed meticulously little tiny seedlings, and I recognize them and leave them there. This whole back wall is the thornless blackberry, which I'll let go at least 1 more year. They're easy to maintain, often produce lots of berries, but they just don't taste like much. So this has been the main bird feeding station for the past week and a half, and I've posted it to the email lists for birders, and I'll be putting something on my blog soon, but this is all about the western tanagers. I've had these banana and orange feeders up now for over 2 years, 2.5 years, and I usually just put 1/4 of an orange on there and 1/4 of a banana on the other nail, and nothing eats them. And I throw them out when they go bad, replace them with fresh fruit, and still nothing eats them. A year and a half ago, a ruby crown kinglet started eating some banana, and it was followed by a orange crown warbler and Townsend's and yellow rump warblers, but they eventually lost interest after 2 or 3 months and stopped eating them. And they never did eat very much. But since now a little over a week, there have been up to 10 western tanagers at a time in this peach tree, and they're feeding on about 6 bananas a day. I've already put out 5 today. And they also have this grape jelly here, which an oriole came in and sampled. And this morning, for the first time, a western tanager tried it. And you see the western tanagers are also eating the oranges. I just put this orange out about an hour ago. So it's been a blast. There's probably been upwards of 30 or maybe even 40 tanagers in the yard cycling through, feeding on the bananas. I have yet to see anything take nesting material from this gizmo, but it can't hurt. It's got lots of stuff on it. Let's see. And then peony and the centaurea were already here. I got some garlic growing back there. I've got some German butterball potatoes. This is my Chandler blueberry, which is full of berries this year. I didn't prune it, so maybe it appreciated that. Let's go back to the main perennial bed here. Here's another variety of garlic. One of them is Dugansky, and I can't remember what the other one is. And I put some more potatoes in here. These are some perennials that were already here that attract some pollinators. There's some asters and sea thrift, and that's a blue-flowered penstemon. Put more garlic in. Here's some of the native columbine with flax, and this is a native Ceanothus cuneatus. I put in 3 in the yard, and for some reason 2 of them just died. This was the one that after it had been established, I transplanted it, and it didn't even flinch with that one. Some of the silly non-natives and non-pollinator plants I put in were 3 chrysanthemums. Oh no, I put in 5 chrysanthemums. This one is a really pretty single pink one called Queen of Cambodia. I put in some peas because I wanted some peas. My German chamomile reseeded last winter and it's just starting to bloom. Here's some more perennials that were already in the garden. Asters. There's some liatris. And this potato here and that one over there are red potatoes that I had put in here last year, and I missed them in the harvest. I've planted some very big sunflowers here and there throughout the yard, and some moderate-sized ones. One of my most exciting successes for planting natives is the showy milkweed, Asclepias speciosus, and it did not look like much when I planted it. I took it out of the pot, and there wasn't even a plant there. There was just a little tiny piece of root. And it eventually put up a couple of shoots, but didn't do much the first year. Then last year it had a few blooms, and this year it's popping up way over here, way over there, and it even has a shoot way over there. So it's been secretly putting out long runners, and it will fill in this whole area in a great big thicket of showy milkweed, and I'm very excited about that. Here's an agastache, or hummingbird hyssop. Smells great, and the hummingbirds do love it. This is where one camas died. I think I stuck a trowel into it while weeding, but it left a whole bunch of seedlings. I think the winter rains in December and early January were just perfect for seedling growth of a lot of things. Here's some chives that I started from seed year before last and have done well. And then this is a lavender, one of 4 that were in here, and I just got rid of the other 3. They do attract some pollinators, but it's not a really dominant native plant. It's much better to move things with, remove things and put things native in their places. I do like some plants that are fragrant and edible, even if they don't attract pollinators. So I have some carnations. I've been lazy about removing all of the oriental poppies because they are so pretty, but they don't like our wet springs and tend to get a black mold. What else is in this perennial bed is this. This is the most successful of all the red flowering currants that I've had. It's huge. You can hardly tell it apart from the tea rose that I put in here. And this side, the carnation. The fireweed is kind of done really well here. There was one seedling that came up here, bloomed pathetically, and I left it, but I didn't realize that it would send out roots. And this one had been chewed up tremendously by a cutworm. That is Noctua pronuba, or a close relative, a non-native moth from Europe that arrives here sometime in the past couple of decades and now eats everything. I had it eating my thyme, oregano, This Daphne was being munched by cutworms. They like iris. They eat the carnation. They even were eating some of the crocus and chives. So there basically isn't anything that the cutworms won't eat. These two natives, this is a type of honeysuckle, and this is woods rose, just started blooming yesterday. And it's very fragrant. It's just not in the best place there because it wants to be huge. Here's one of the taller Indian plums, but a male, alas, no fruit. And I just let a few California poppies go. They just spring up everywhere. Another chrysanthemum, and it's a goldenrod, a penstemon, an aster. The grasses are Romer's fescue, Festuca romeri. I planted 3 or 4 around the yard, and one of them put up seed heads, but instead of putting up seeds the year I transplanted it, it made bulblets. And so all these other ones here are progeny from that one. But since then, all of them, including the ones I transplanted, put out seeds and actual flowers instead of bulblets. And this last winter, like everything else, they reseeded prolifically. I just let a few remain, like this one here will be a new clump. And the tall, pale pink checker mallow, campestris, also reseeded, and so I put a couple over here. The other checker mallow reseeded a little bit, the alviflora, and I put one in here. And then over in this area, there's a few seedlings of a Oregon native wildflower mix that I scattered here. I probably should have scattered them last fall, but I didn't do it until February, so only a few have taken place. Total non-native is this daylily that I salvaged from the dark, shady area behind the apple tree. My peach trees aren't doing so great. I've been brutal in trying to prune them down to size. This one does have about 15 peaches on it. The other ones have nothing. This one has almost no leaves. It's been too cool and wet a spring, and they lose their first crop of leaves due to peach leaf curl. But generally, the past couple of years have put out new branches and plenty of leaves and have been very prolific with at least leaves. Let's see, there's a French sorrel that I started from seed here, and oregano I started from seed is now a huge bush. I'm going to have to keep it cut back pretty soon. Same with this culinary sage, which I use only very rarely. And back there I have the fragrant Nicotiana alata coming back from the roots. It died back during the winter. One also survived that red pot over there, which is fun. Another twin berry honeysuckle right here, which did not like its transplants too well. It's taken it a while for it to recover, but it's just blooming now and it's coming back. There's a non-native sage, scabiosa. Here's the native Vergata subspecies of the checker mallow. That's quite a bit showier than the campestris. Oh, this is really interesting. I had these volunteer monkey flowers come out of nowhere. I thought they were going to be this red-flowered species that was planted as an ornamental in the yard a couple years ago by the previous owners, and survived the winter, and it even reseeded everywhere, and I put some around. None of them survived last summer or the winter, so we'll see what happens with this one. I haven't keyed it out to make sure that it is a native, but I didn't put it here. Here's a tall pink flowering monarda that is not the red ones that hummingbirds like. It's one that bumblebees really like, and I started it from seed 2 years ago, and it and the one behind me have done really well. This is where I weeded out a huge number of volunteer seedlings from both the alyssum, which is supposed to be an annual but survives the winter. I pulled the huge adult grown plant out, and underneath it were hundreds of seedlings. The monarda reseeded this winter for the first time, and so did this. This is the Spheralcia campestris. Here's one of the seedlings I didn't manage to pull out that I transplanted elsewhere. Sedalcia, not Spheralcia. This native geum. The peonies are at their peak now. Totally useless, beautiful plants. Same with these ranunculus. In this part of the yard over here, I just saved these yellow irises from under the apple tree and don't know what to do with them. Maybe leave them there. These various irises were already here. My Meyer lemon was hammered by the temperatures that got down to 17 degrees in late January, but it's still alive, and I trust it will come back this summer, put in deeper roots, and maybe become more established. I dug up the two huge dahlias that were closer to the front edge of this perennial bed last fall, put them in the shed in dry soil, and unheated shed, and they survived fine. And I put them towards the back end of the bed now, and I can tie them up to the railing because they're huge and heavy with great big flowers. This one is pink and the one around the corner there is yellow. Here's a rosemary that survived the 17-degree temperatures perfectly well. And the poppies, see, this is ones that have developed since it stopped raining about a week and a half ago. But here are what happens with the buds when it rains so much. They just get all moldy and black and gross. Here's yet another one of the chrysanthemums that I planted. And here's my peppermint patch, which is now only about half the size that it was a little while ago. But I think I need to dig up another 3/4 of that. It's very aggressive, but also very delicious and prolific. In this side of the perennial bed, there are some more blueberries. This is a different variety that I can't remember the name of. This is the Chandler. It's one of the bigger berried varieties, and also a very late ripening in middle July. Spearmint I left there. I reduced the sunchoke or Jerusalem artichoke clumps to just these 2, 1, and 2. But the little tiny tubers that I left in the ground that I missed are popping up everywhere. There was 3 huge clumps here, which each produced a total of maybe 25 to 30 pounds. No more than that. Probably about 40 pounds of sunchokes each. There's no way I could eat that much. And they were difficult to keep in bounds during the summer, so I just left 2 clumps, and we'll see what happens. Here's one of the red flowering currants. Here I scattered a seed mix of the Territorial Gardens hummingbird flowers, and somehow they got to be too dense in here. I don't remember what all is in there, but some of the flowers they listed I did not consider to be typical hummingbird flowers. And I haven't yet planted anything back in here, but there's some sunchoke starting to come up. I'm not sure what I'll put back in there. Maybe I'll put a tomato in there. And some crocosmia here. This is a big dark red flowering one, and the one that's over there that's also very invasive is smaller orange flowered, but the hummingbirds do like them. And the rest of this side bed has mostly things that were here, but I planted this ocean spray. I put in, from the native figwort that reseeds so prolifically, I scattered some around the garden. This is just a volunteer, useless columbine. It's kind of weird and pretty, but I've never seen a hummingbird feed from it. This is a native prunus, some kind of cherry. It was given to me by my neighbor in a pot as a native plant, but it wasn't labeled and it didn't have leaves out. It's going to be in a kind of shady spot here, so I might move it to where it could become a small tree somewhere else. This is a snapdragon that is now 2 years old. I planted it as a little seedling in spring of 2020. I got another snowberry that I put in, and there's another Oregon filbert, and another stinging nettle back here. I think I'll have 4 stinging nettles in the yard now. Oh, I might as well just finish this as one whole video. Here's the backyard, which used to be just all lawn except for the 6 raised beds. I added the brush pile, which has been fabulous. I got rid of the bamboo that was here and put in 2 Oregon grapes, the Delphinium trolifolium, and from my neighbors got this beautiful native fringe cups, which is Tolima grandiflora. It's not going to focus. There we go. And it has reseeded prolifically, and my hopes are that these will survive. They'll be somewhat crowded, but they'll sort it out. That's what they do in nature, and it'll fill in back here. I also transplanted some of the volunteer columbines from out front, but I don't know if these are going to be the hybrids or the native red ones. And then last year I started 6 artichokes from seedlings, and the packet said they're very erratic and can be low germination success, but all 6 of them survived, and I couldn't bear to throw them away, so I now have those 2 in the front, oak and serviceberry prairie, and then these 4 here, and I've already eaten 7 this spring. Look forward to more. Here's a bit of another mini native prairie back here with some roamers, fescue, and the camas twinberry honeysuckle. This one is super happy in this spot, and it blooms all summer long, and all the hummingbirds like it. The Douglas aster is also very happy here. This is a non-native yarrow from the front bed that I just put back here. It does attract some pollinators. Another one of the campestris globe checker mallows. And this is the least happy of all of the red flowering currants, but it looks much better than last year, so I think it's finally getting established. This is where I planted some peas, and I had them under hardware cloth cages while the white crown and golden crown sparrows were here, because I know they like to nibble the seeds. I actually sowed these seeds really early this year. They were several inches tall when I saw there was only 1 golden crown sparrow left on April 24th, and so I removed the cages. And then some cold weather reappeared, the birds returned and defoliated them. So they're just barely starting to recover, and I may get some peas from these here are a type of snap pea, and those are snow peas. These borages are very good for honeybees, and there's even a bumblebee foraging right there. And I don't remember which species that is. I haven't reviewed them this year yet. But I also saw my first Calliope hummingbird of the yard forage from these flowers. So they're not totally useless. Way back here in the corner is a hot weather plant that survived the winter. This is the Salvia guaranitica. It's native to South America, but it's a beautiful tall plant with deep purple flowers filled with nectar that hummingbirds love. Let's see here. Let's do the raised beds quickly. Lettuce and radicchio and a weed that will provide some nectar for insects when it blooms, but I'll pull it out before it goes to seed. This huge clematis was kind of exhausted from last year's heavy bloom and maybe hammered a bit from the 17-degree temperature, so it put only on a few flowers and just now has gone crazy with new growth. Under here I have corn. Maybe I can lift this up. And this corn is a variety called plomito, and it comes from Peru. And it's a type of popping corn, but it doesn't pop into big white corn kernels, but puffs only in a hot pan with oil. It's a very common Peruvian snack, and there are dozens of varieties that do that. I just don't see them here in the United States. These were from the big bunch of Walla Walla sweets, and I planted them here for green onions. And I planted a bunch of seeds in here just a couple days ago: carrots, parsley, turnips, radishes, lettuce. And this is lettuce from last winter. It's still there. It's going to start bolting here real soon. This is one of the Swiss chards that I started from seed 2 years ago, and I was going to have some for dinner last night until I came and looked closely, and I saw that it's covered in aphids. So I'll leave it to the birds. Birds have been munching on the seeds quite a bit. On the leaves. The lesser goldfinches and housefinches like the leaves. And I saw a chickadee feeding in here the other day, and now I know why. But look at this thing, has a trunk. These are the sweet peas that I started from seed here 2 years ago, and they reseed in the fall. And this is the very first flower, super fragrant. And I can never remember the name of this. It looks like April in Paris, but it is not. It's something very similar called Sweet Scent or something like that. And just another vegetable bed with some green onions that I started from seed. Probably would have been better to start them indoors earlier, but I was traveling a lot this year. And I have some radishes, mizuna, bok choy, and I'll be eating those. I've been harvesting some of this lettuce here, as you can see, and escarole, and I've sprouted some spinach from seed that are taking nicely. Potatoes, purple potatoes in the front here, one called Huckleberry Rose, and in the back are German butterballs. And these are my high keeper onions, which I started from seed last summer, and then I transplanted here in September. And I put a layer of unfinished compost on here, and it was just full of little seedlings, mostly blackberries. I hear one still there, but also cherries and quite a few other weed seeds that weren't killed because this compost wasn't fully composted. I needed to empty the compost bin. Here's another German chamomile, and I left all the volunteer dill that showed up in here, dill seed that was in the compost, probably from last year's garden, and it's been great. This Swiss chard doesn't have any aphids, but it's been eaten on a lot more by the lesser goldfinches. This is what I had for dinner last night. Instead, there's another Douglas's iris, blooming French sorrel, makes great addition to salads and soups. This is the Monarda that's red, Monarda didyma, and the hummingbirds love it. Unfortunately, something's been munching on it, and I have not come out here at night to try to see what is nibbling on it, but it's probably cutworms. I have 3 grow sacks here with banana fingerling potatoes, and I haven't decided entirely what I'm going to do with this bed here. I've had squash here in the past, and then this last summer I sowed some leeks, put them in here in the fall, and then buried them, and I've had a fantastic leek harvest all winter. And these are still edible, even though they started to put up flower spikes. I put in some parsley because I didn't have any reseeding. This is a native pollinator plant called, I have some in the front as well, figwort or California beeflower, and it reseeds prolifically as well, so I'll dig these up and probably just toss them. I don't need any more. And here's an Agastache hummingbird hyssop, which is from that same one in the front yard. Hummingbirds do like it, and also a lot of other pollinators. Here's the marionberry, which is doing fabulous. It's got a huge crop of flowers. Last year it sort of aborted partway through its berry season because of the heat wave we had in late June. But you can see it already has some very robust primocanes. These won't flower this year. This is coming up from the roots, from the crown. It'll grow 15 to 20 feet long, and if I leave it, it will sprout roots at the tip to try to form a new colony away from the parent plant. And then what I took with the foilicanes that did that last year is I pulled them up off the ground and then trained them, tied them with twist ties to the wires and trellis behind here. And then they each send out a floricane this time of year. So these short canes ending in flowers are coming off of last year's primocanes. And that's the only way that the marionberry produces fruit. Here are my composting situation. I'm leaving the doors open of these now so that the house wren can get in them and feed on the arthropods that are in there, sawflies and other kinds of flies. So that little tiny nest box you can see sort of straight above the raised bed with the frost cloth. It's up on a post up against the cherry tree. That's where the house wrens have bred for the past 2 years. 3 years in a row. But last year the adult male house wren vanished, was replaced by an intruder house wren who started singing and trying to take in sticks in the box while the female is trying to feed 6 young inside the box. And she wouldn't have that. She kept chasing him away while trying to feed the 6 young. She was working nonstop. The 6 young fledged, and then she decided she accepted that male, and the 2 of them pulled off a second brood last summer. This year she arrived on April 24th, I believe, which is earlier than she has the past 2 years. But a male never did arrive. It's not too late. This intruder male did arrive on May 30th last year. It's the first day I noticed him singing a few yards away. And the adult male disappeared around June 7th or 8th, I think. So there is a chance that another wandering male might show up and take this territory. These irises were here when I moved in, and I've just kept them free of weeds, and I even sort of thinned them out a bit, and they responded quite well. There's my moth sheet, which I haven't used much. I made these little hanging pots here with alyssum that I transplanted from the seedlings, volunteers, and I put some night-scented stock in there, little seedlings that haven't been eaten by the slugs yet. They ate all the rest of my seedlings. This is one of the same chives I started from seed 2 years ago, as well as this is a volunteer pansy from the ones in the front yard, but you see the slugs, little tiny slugs, just love them. I don't put enough sluggo out often enough. The scented geraniums barely survived the winter, coming back from the roots. This one did a little bit better than this one, which just has a couple of growing points coming back up. And this marjoram is very happy. I cut back the thyme, and it didn't respond very well to that. Oops. But I have a huge one in the front yard. And then this is the gardenia, which is very yellow and unhappy. I'm not sure if it doesn't look like it has, well, maybe it is chlorotic, not getting enough iron, not be acid enough. One of the red flowering currants. Here's some volunteers that I salvaged from chives, thyme, and oregano just to give away, as well as some of these ground cherries volunteered from last year. My strawberry bed, another Nicotiana alata that survived the winter. Some seedlings that I started of kale called Beira tronchuda. It's a Portuguese type, but I believe it's what they call couve in Brazil, and some more carnations, and some epazote, and some parsley root. This is my black cap raspberry my friend Eric gave me as a little tiny scroggly plant, and now has all these fabulous floricanes coming off of last year's primocanes. It grows exactly like Marionberry, and will also put out rootlets at the tips of the branches if you leave them on the ground. And then down here are this year's primocanes, which won't flower. This is in contrast to the red raspberry here. So the red raspberry, here are the primocanes from this year. These have come up all the way from the roots, but in the late summer they'll put out flowers at the tips, and I'll have some berries in September and even into November, depending on when we get the first freeze. But if I don't cut them to the ground, they then put out these little side shoots next year, so these were last year's. This long dead thing here is the dead tip of last year's primocane, and these little floricanes come off, and it'll have its first crop of the year in June. So I get a double crop from this if I don't cut it down to the ground. And that's the entirety of Calliope Corner.